Welcome to the UbeMatcha
What's Ube?
UbeMatcha Podcast. This is our first episode with me, Elisha Tarada, and
I'm Leah Tarada.
As a host, and we are married couples. And this podcast is going to be about our lifestyle as Asians living in America. And a little bit of background, we used to live in Seattle and we recently moved to Austin, Texas. And even before that, I guess, I grew up in Japan. And it's like near a Tokyo area, if you care. It's called Saitama Prefecture. That's where I grew up. And when I was 13, I came to US and I went to Kirkland, Washington, which is very nearby Seattle. And that's where I met Leah. And Leah, you grew up in Seattle the whole time.
Yeah,
right?
I was born and raised in Seattle, so I guess a native Pacific Northwest. I don't know, Pacific Northwestern native. I guess that's what you call it.
Which is always, I think, confusing because how we define whenever I check a survey or the school, I don't know what it is, like when I apply for college and stuff, I have to identify as...
You mean ethnicity?
Ethnicity, and it's like, am I like what? Like a Pacific Islander, or am I like was there like Asian? Southeast Asians, or...
I don't think there was even a Southeast Asian. I think it was like Asians, and then the Pacific Islander and other, I think, was a category that you could check. So confusing for me. I thought it was Pacific Islander, I think I checked mark Pacific Islander on the ethnicity, whatever you call it, confirmation form. But I'm Filipino American, a little bit of Chinese. I guess I grew up with some Chinese customs, but mainly Filipino. I was born in Seattle, but then I moved to the east side when I was about 6 years old. So yeah, it's been new now, moving to Austin, to Texas, a little different from Seattle, and we'll talk about the differences because we've noticed a lot just from being here for about 7 or 8 months.
Yeah, so we'll dive more into those things in the maybe possibly future episode, or as we talk about some of the questions that we're going to cover today. But going back to the name of UbeMatcha Podcast, Ube is basically Leah, because in the Filipino culture, ube is like the thing that everyone eats and loves.
Well, I feel like growing up, it's an ingredient used in a lot of desserts. So ube is a grated yam, a Filipino purple yam, very bright purple. Although in a lot of Filipino desserts, ube essence is used or food coloring to give it a very vibrant ube. Essence. Sometimes real ube, but a lot of times it's like a food coloring. But that probably contributes to purple being my favorite color too. But yeah, I grew up eating a lot of ube, and I feel like now it's become almost trendy and fashionable to include ube in desserts and drinks everywhere, which I'm super excited about. I think it's cool that now people are learning more about Filipino culture and being interested in Filipino food and desserts. So yeah, ube, try something ube if you haven't yet.
Yeah, and I think on the Japanese cultural side, I think matcha is also, maybe the trend is a little bit older than maybe ube becoming popular, but matcha has been, maybe I would say like last 10, 15 years, like slowly getting introduced to American culture as a tea that's not like black tea that you can order at places like Starbucks. And even the regular cafes now carry like matcha latte, or you can use matcha as like finishing things on the dessert. And so yeah, that part represents, I guess, my cultural background, the matcha.
But did you drink matcha a lot growing up?
Not a lot. Matcha is very expensive. Now that it's available at a cafe, maybe you don't think about it, but like few grams of matcha, like 20 grams of matcha could be like $10 at the cheapest end, and it could go up to $30. So we didn't grow up having money to just pour on the matcha, but I had a lot of green tea. So
there's different grades of matcha too.
Yeah, like ceremonial ones being like you're supposed to drink straight, like you see on the maybe some of the movies, like what was the movie that we were watching? Beef.
Yes.
Yeah, you probably seen.
I think that was a little exaggerated, but I think
has been making the matcha for guests.
Yeah, or if you have a Japanese cultural center near you, they probably have
a ceremonial.
They have matcha ceremonies, tea ceremonies, and
yeah.
I believe part of that tea ceremony is mixing matcha and trying it, and showing that cultural aspect of Japan.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad now that's becoming more mainstream, because I think when you think about tea, it probably used to be more about British culture, like the tea ceremony, like with the layered cakes and what do you call that? Layered tea ceremony plates.
Oh, the like tea sandwiches.
Tea sandwiches. That's probably more of what it used to be trendy, but now it's more Japanese.
Like high tea.
Yeah, high tea. Yeah. Now I think the Asian cultures are becoming a little bit more mainstream in U.S. And I think we grew up seeing like not too much of our representation, or maybe lots of fake fast food of Asian food, to becoming like, oh wow, like these food are like a real thing that everyone gets excited about.
Yeah.
So we'll go more into those details in the future episodes. So before you forget, please subscribe. If you're on the YouTube, we are going to do a lot of long form like this, probably longer time, and we will also record some for the shorts, and we'll have some available on the podcast section of YouTube, and we're going to be posting this on the TikTok as a little bit of short segments. So please look at the description for all the places you can find our episode. But Leah, today I asked ChatGPT the 10 questions that we should answer. Could be peaceful answering, or could be debating between us. And I did not, so I didn't prepare the questions to ask the ChatGPT. So this will be first time that we'll be seeing those 10 questions.
Okay, so the first thing that pops out of our mouth is our answer for these.
Yeah. So I have it ready. I already asked it ahead of time. So I'm going to ask the question, and maybe we can take turns in who is going to answer first.
Yeah.
So first question, which city has a better vibe for young professionals, Seattle or Austin?
Ooh. I think it really depends on the lifestyle you're looking for. At least comparing Seattle, which is a very big tech hub, and Austin, which is almost like an emerging tech hub. There are similarities, I feel like, with Austin and Seattle in that people are chill. They don't really go, at least if you work for a tech company, you're not going to work wearing a suit, and there's no expectation usually wearing that. You can work from home remotely. I think it's like more open to that. You can meet a lot of different tech professionals. People are pretty driven from what I've seen. They work at a lot of different companies. I feel like, kind of both of the vibes are similar with that chill atmosphere. I do think, though, because Seattle is much more expensive, there could be a propensity for maybe young professionals to be more focused on moving up the ladder faster and more focused on work, because it's expensive to afford housing, to go out and to eat and hang out and maintain their lifestyle, versus Austin. The prices are going up here, but I think still not to the degree it is in Seattle. So I think people can still, it seems like, be a little bit more chill and laid back and not feel like they're stuck in the rat race, kind of just take their time a little bit, versus in Seattle, I think maybe there's a little bit more pressure to move up and to do really well, to make more money, just because you kind of need it to survive. I do feel like, though, in Seattle, a lot of conversations I had with people often revolved around work, versus in Austin, I think people just kind of talk about fun stuff, and sometimes a little bit of work is thrown in there, but it's not mainly around work. So that was kind of an interesting difference that I noticed.
Maybe if you're a young professional who are really like a driven, and I don't mind working like 12 hours a day or like a long hours during the week. And then I don't mind, the commute traffic, although maybe some jobs are more remote, but companies are starting to ask you to be back into the office. And living in Seattle for a long time, we know how bad the traffics are. You'll be spending your precious time just commuting and meeting coworkers who maybe only want to talk about work, and maybe you get to hang out for lunch, but there's nothing really after that, right? And if you're a young professional who loves to build up a relationship with your coworker and the boss, maybe you can utilize a skill to maybe move up the ladder or could make connections and get a new job in Austin, possibly better than maybe Seattle, where maybe it's more like a grind as a work. So yeah, maybe different personality, but yeah, price is probably the real challenge for young professionals, because obviously young professionals probably make less money than someone who are a little bit older and have higher positions in company typically. So yeah, I'd say you might have to move around if you realize like Seattle wasn't the right city or Austin wasn't the right city. Maybe difficult to figure out when you're young, but maybe don't be afraid to learn about it.
Yeah, try out different, especially while you're young. I think move around and live different places, and you'll kind of find, I think, the vibe you're looking for. Especially now where fully remote work is a lot more acceptable. I feel like you could even live abroad or travel abroad while you're working. I know many people that do that who live anywhere in the world, not just Seattle or Austin.
Yeah. Cool. Let's move on to the next question. Okay. Which place offers better food options? Texas BBQ and Tex-Mex, or Seattle's seafood and coffee culture? Ooh. So
wait, comparing
basically it's asking if you are in Texas, you get Texas BBQ.
Yeah.
Delicious. Tex-Mex. Or do you prefer Seattle's like seafood and coffee culture? So the question is, which place offer better food options? Obviously, maybe I'll go first. Obviously, this depends on if you love like Tex-Mex barbecue or like if you love the seafood. I think if I were to pick, I would pick Texas food options.
Really?
Yeah, because although Seattle have a lot of like a seafood and all that stuff abundant, I think to me they don't taste authentic. Or I'll say 90%, 95% are not authentic Japanese food or some of the Korean food that I grew up with. There are, of course, places that serves real stuff, and I love some of these restaurants, and those are the restaurants that I go back whenever I travel back to Seattle.
Yeah.
But many of them are just like okay, and not really like passionate about like I'm gonna show everyone what the authentic food tastes like, which I feel like is a lot of what chefs are doing in Austin, especially in Austin. I think I can't speak about Dallas, Houston, or San Antonio as much, but when it comes to Austin, there are some chefs who are really passionate about it, like a Uchi or the Otoko or the ramen place that we always go to.
Ramen Tatsuya.
Ramen Tatsuya, that's our favorite. And I can see owners being really passionate, like, running those restaurants, and the quality is top notch and they care about it. Whereas Seattle, I think you just get copycat ramen places where some big money investment is obviously behind all those chains of ramens, and they all taste like okay. And I think they make it efficient to produce those ramen like products, but maybe not as like flavorful, or maybe not as. Like,
why is it more efficient, or why do you think there's a focus on efficiency though?
I think it's the real estate, and I think that
it's expensive in Seattle.
Very expensive in Seattle. You only get small place. That's one thing I really appreciate about Austin restaurants, because there's big space and there's a lot of parking. Usually we don't have to worry about parking, but in Seattle it's like if it's a good place, it's like some hole in the wall place where you really can't find parking around, or you have to pay valet parking. And I think it's just, if you want to like say sell ramen at like $16, $18, we have to cut corners if you're paying a lot on the real estate to be in a prime location. And if you have to pay high Seattle wages for workers, you have to make it efficient. You have to make it so ramen can be prepared by anybody, essentially, right? With all the recipe being just boring, same thing, possibly compared to maybe in Austin, if you can afford a little bit more money for the chef, the main chef, to be like, I'm going to check the quality. I'm going to be working here every day, making sure it's a top-notch quality, which is not realistic, I think, in Seattle.
Oh, I see. Are there Japanese chefs actually in Austin?
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of these authentic ones, especially on the expensive side, is like Japanese chefs moving from Japan to Austin. And you can find a lot of videos. Like I love watching like eater videos where they highlight Japanese chefs, like, you know, working abroad and selling like a sushi. Mostly, I think sushi and ramen are the biggest two where they come because they know they'll make money.
Yeah.
And I even read an article in Japanese where they're talking about how dream-like it is to work as a chef in US because you actually make a lot more money.
Oh, than if you even opened a restaurant and ran that in Tokyo?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, because Tokyo, you're competing against all the other people who are spending their life and passion making ramen, working crazy hours. Whereas here, like, competition is like nothing. Like,
yeah, there's a different variety of food, right? And I think different varieties of like cuisines like are not really competing with each other. Yeah.
Especially when it's good. I think the news spreads so fast in Austin. They just see lines at the ramen place, which it happens in Seattle sometimes when it opens, but otherwise maybe not as much. But what's your take on food you get here in Austin or Seattle?
I feel like in Seattle, you can get really good quality food. I think a lot of times, though, the food also becomes really expensive. So it's not something every day. And I think something that I would love more in the US is if there was good quality food at a decent price for every day. I think there needs to be more food like that. I think in Austin, we can get more food. I feel like that's more like every day and still get very good quality, even if it's not like, ooh, Michelin star. You don't need that for every day. But I feel like what I really like here in Austin is the uniqueness, I feel like, of some of the flavors when I go places are very unexpected flavors that I find. There was this one coffee place in downtown Austin, I don't remember the name of it, that randomly had Filipino chocolate that they used for the hot cocoa.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was
like a growing in the Philippines.
Yeah, it was actually, and I was like, I've never seen that before.
Yeah, I never seen even chocolates coming from Philippines.
Yeah, so that was really unique. And then coffee places have unique flavors. I think there was one like using goat milk.
Goat milk?
Yeah, I think actually you ordered a drink with goat milk.
Oh, I did. Yeah.
I don't remember the name of it. It has a very specific
ghee or something?
No, ghee is a butter.
A butter,
a melted butter,
okay,
yeah.
Yeah.
But so I think it's like a Mexican-inspired drink. It's really unique, and I think not for everyone, but...
Yeah, it wasn't for me. It was a little weird for me.
But I think it's cool that they can experiment with different flavors and then just try it out. And I feel like going out here is easier too. Also with like, I feel like there's a big focus on like the design and how spaces feel. And they tend to feel very cozy and like welcoming for people to work at for hours on end. Versus I felt like in Seattle, there was more of a churn or like get your coffee at this place for 5-10 minutes, maybe talk to your coworkers while you're waiting in line and then go back to the office like right away. Here, I feel like people kind of chill out, have, they still work, but they also spend time, take their time at coffee places, talking to each other, like catching up. And all that fun stuff. So a lot of really cool outdoor coffee places too. So I do miss in Seattle, some of the more specialty places that we don't have here in Austin yet. And we could probably go into a whole other video about food because food is such a big topic. But for example, soba, there's no specialty soba place yet, at least here in Texas. And one of our favorite soba places is in Seattle. So I hope more of those places will come. But yeah, so far, I don't know if I can choose. I think I just like a variety of food. So it's really hard to say what is better. It's just different. I think a lot of it is different. Yeah.
Yeah. If you have to choose one, for the sake of choosing one.
What were the options again? So it was coffee, seafood.
It picked the category, but I would say just pick a city to be
for food.
For food, yeah. As of now. Like if you retire and you can't move because you're too old, and you are stuck with that region.
For food.
For food, yeah.
Depends.
You have to pick one.
If I'm a millionaire, then probably Seattle.
Oh yeah.
If I am a working class person, then I'd probably pick Austin. Yeah. I just the price will continue to rise, but you can still afford it.
That's true.
I think down the line.
Okay, so the third question. How has the experience of being immigrants shaped our worldview compared to those who were born and raised in the US? So maybe this is where the divide happens, where I'm the one who basically immigrated and my perspective changed versus you were born here, so that's going to be different. So maybe this is where we also need to collaborate in answering this question, because maybe there's something I noticed about you or you noticed about me that's different, and maybe something we can attribute to say, maybe it's because like you grew up in US, or maybe it's because I grew up in Japan and become immigrant that we have such a thought difference.
Okay, so the question is, how has being an immigrant shaped your experience growing up?
Group versus those who were born and raised in the US, and that represents you, right? I grew up in Japan. I lived in Korea for a little bit even. What do you notice about my thought process that you think are like, that's definitely a Japanese thing or like a Korean thing?
I guess I don't know. It's probably more of a foreigner thing than a Japanese or Korean thing.
Okay.
When you're younger, I think you don't really know the difference, especially since I'm not Japanese or Korean. I probably can't really tell if something you do is Japanese or Korean. So maybe it seems Asian to me, or as a foreigner. Yeah.
Okay. What do you think? How I maybe think about my world is a little bit different because I came from Asia compared to you who grew up here.
I think
Or did I assimilate to the culture to pretend like I'm American at this point?
No, I think one thing I feel like I kind of make fun about is the fact that you don't really know idioms. That I think if you grew up in the US, you would know these idioms just because you've heard it since you were a kid, right? Like, kick the bucket. You don't know what kick the bucket means?
I still don't know what the kick the bucket
I think you just keep forgetting. I tell you what it means and then you forget what it means.
Like, why am I kicking the bucket?
Yeah, what does that mean to kick the bucket? Like, literally, I'm not kicking the bucket. Literally, I'm kicking the bucket or not? Like, what does that mean? Yeah, so I think, and so I say those idioms like, oh, he kicked the bucket. And maybe if I'm reading a news article, I'm like, oh, blah, 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 kick the bucket. And you're like, what? Who? What? Why did they kick a bucket? I assume that you knew naturally what that idiom meant, and not that I have to explain the idiom to you.
Interesting. Yeah, maybe that is one difference that I noticed, where when I talk to American people in US, they do a lot of reference to like movies or music or like some cartoon.
Also referencing movies and music and pop culture references.
Yeah, pop culture
really
reference.
Understand.
And it's almost as if they don't realize that they're talking to me who did not grow up in US, and you almost forget that those things you've seen and been influenced by in the past by the pop culture is not the same experience someone like me
not everyone right? knows or understands.
Because when I reference something like animation or drama from Japan, I consciously try to explain because I assume they don't know it. So maybe that's a subtle worldview difference where it's almost like how foreigners make fun of Americans, people thinking they are the center of the world.
Yeah.
But that's not true. There are so many other countries and so many, even the Hollywood. Yes, Hollywood is like the movie.
It's global.
The global,
in a way,
right?
Yeah.
Even then, like not everyone cares about it, right? So that's maybe like a subtle difference that I notice about people in America versus growing up in Asia. You're migrating, you're more conscious about the assumption about other people's understanding of like references.
Yeah.
Maybe that's one thing. I don't know.
That's a fun one.
Yeah, that's a fun one. And if I talk to you, what do I notice about you being American versus if I were dating like Asian girl? Maybe that's one. I think when I talk to you or maybe American people, they are not like they're more up to date, but I would say being politically more correct, like understanding like, oh, I can't say this thing about this person anymore. Or I have to be careful with the pronouns now.
Yeah.
I have to be careful not to offend these people. I think that's much more like...
Is that American?
It is American thing, yeah.
To be politically correct.
Yeah, correct, and making sure you're not like, offending someone by accident. Whereas in Asia, like, we offend people all the time. Like we call someone fat, we call someone, this or that. Like all the things about how they appear.
Yeah.
Like we compare much more because I guess we're similar, right? Like Asians talking to Asians, we notice like the subtle difference.
So do you feel like when you talk to other Asians, even if they're not Japanese or Korean, you can be less politically correct?
I would say so.
Or you can like joke around maybe more.
Yeah. or that's now it's a little bit more frowned upon, but in the media and in everyday conversation, you'll definitely notice like someone calling someone else like ugly, like straight up. And maybe they do. If you're like teens in America, talking with your friends, you're probably more candid about how you say or do things. But in Asia, you definitely, even in publicly, say those things to each other. And things are changing. Like I notice Japanese people are consciously saying like, okay, let's not say this in media. Let's not like talk about the appearance of other people. Mm-hmm. And I think those influences are coming from like US. And a lot of people possibly grew up in the US are also influenced and then bringing back the culture and like, hey, in the work culture, why should women wear the heels at work? That's like a weird traditional thing in Japan.
That's probably misogynistic.
Or
the looks misogynistic.
Yeah. And now I think the culture is finally shifting where fathers in Japan are starting to take more responsibility of raising children.
Oh, because of the Western influence.
I think so. I think it has to have come from somewhere, or maybe it's a young generation of people who are not,
maybe trying to change from like how they were raised from their parents' generation. Yeah.
And I think we're like right in the middle where we are still inheriting some of that stuff from our parent generation, but we're like maybe young enough to change.
Yeah.
In our view. So maybe that's the biggest difference that I'm seeing. Like in Asia, I feel like we're just catching up. In the US, we're like on the edge of being conscious about things we say, the things how we perceive in the media. Now you see random token Asians in the movie because you have to put someone right in the Hollywood movie, but in Asian movies or drama you don't see token white people, token black people, because that's not a required political thing, right?
To be politically correct. Yeah, it is really interesting how that's different.
Cool. Next question. Who had the more challenging cultural adaptation process? Elisha moving from Japan to the US or Leah growing up as a Filipino American in Seattle. So maybe the question isn't as fun for me because it's like, yeah, of course I had a hard time adapting.
Yeah.
But I think that's like something you can assume. I think what might be more interesting is asking you this question as a Filipino American growing up in Seattle.
Yeah.
Yes, you were born and raised in Seattle, but you still had to maybe culturally adapt because your parents probably raised you like a Filipino people would do in Philippines, maybe more Americanized, but yeah, how would you describe that experience?
I grew up thinking I was Filipino.
Okay.
For the most part. I was trying to think back to when I first consciously thought I was Filipino and American. I think something that you brought up that made me think about it. This was a long time ago. I don't even know exactly when this happened, but you brought up to me that I think I was talking about myself as I was Asian. And then you said that I was definitely American too. And then I had never consciously thought about the fact that I am also American and not just Asian. I think growing up in Seattle, there were a lot of Asians. So I did see a lot of other Asians, Vietnamese, Chinese, like growing up. We went to school together and a lot of my friends were Asian. But I also had a lot of friends that were also Caucasian. I think the majority of my school was white, so I had also a lot of Caucasian friends. I think what made me think that I was more Asian growing up was, I think, one, food, like the kind of food that you eat, especially the kind of food that you bring to school. I think school is probably what gives you the first sign of that you're different.
Yeah.
Because at home, as before I started going to school, then when you grow up with your parents, you would learn the language and the culture. And my parents are I'm first generation Filipino American, but they came from the Philippines. They weren't born here. They had to learn English and assimilate. So I grew up learning English, but mainly Tagalog, I feel like, as a kid. I remember as a kid saying things in Tagalog that I don't even know if I learned English actually at home. I think I just started learning English when I started going to school. And I just remember mixing up words in my head when I was a kid. I wish I remember more exactly what I mixed up, but...
So your parents were talking to you in Tagalog, or your grandma having more influence?
That's the thing I don't exactly remember. I know they talked to me a lot in Tagalog because it's easier for them. That's their first language, right? My grandma didn't know that much English. She definitely spoke to us in Tagalog, so...
Because now they talk to you in English, I know this,
yeah.
Right? They stopped talking to you in Tagalog. I don't know what happened.
Well, I think it's because, when you start to go to school, you speak English more. So I think they eventually... And then you speak English back to them. Like, I always spoke to my parents back in English. Yeah. Maybe when I started going to school, so then they just got used to speaking to me in English and thinking I don't understand Tagalog. It's just easier for me to understand English. That could be what they think. Even though I can't understand Tagalog. And I think they unknowingly mix English and Tagalog when they speak to me anyway, and they don't really notice. But, like, I understand both mixed together almost seamlessly. But yeah, food, like I would bring like adobo or homa. Those are very distinct Filipino food to school and eat them for lunch. I brought a Filipino dessert to school once. And I remember, it's one called polvoron. It's like a sugar cookie.
Oh, did I have one?
Yeah. It's a Goldilocks.
Oh, is it covered one?
It's very sugary. There's like there is an ube flavored of it, but like there are different. Like there's like pinipig, which is like almost like a Rice Krispie one, but it's a very distinct Filipino dessert. And I gave one to this boy in 4th grade that I liked, and I gave it to him at lunchtime. So he could like try it. And then he went to the garbage and he threw it up. Wow. He was a white kid too, so he was not Asian. So I don't know what he expected when he ate it, but like, yeah, he threw it up in the garbage.
That's when your crush was over.
No, I was like, oh, you didn't like it, but like, it's also So that was kind of funny. When I thought back, I was like, here you go. Here's some of my culture.
Yeah, I get some of that when I bring like a random Asian snack to the office.
Yeah.
Like they're like, what is this? Like, is this even edible? Like,
yeah.
And some people are like, oh yeah, this is so good that they just eat it. But
yeah,
it's still not a thing that I think American people have discovered, or that it's weird if you didn't grow up with that taste, because it's
I think some things are acquired taste. Yeah. Like they could eventually become delicious. I didn't even think like matcha is an acquired taste. Like I don't think it tastes easily. Like later. If you gave it to an American baby, I don't know if would like it.
It has to be like
right?
older. Even in Japan, it's more older, a little bit older. Like when you start to like a bitter taste a little bit. Do you feel like you had a like maybe hard time adapting though, or having the cultural difference, or is it more seamless? Because Seattle, you didn't notice much of a difference. So
I feel like it's probably unique to Seattle that I never felt like an outcast because there were so many other Asians. And I had like Caucasian friends that were also interested in Asian culture. So they also like were open to trying out things from Filipino culture. So I think I was very fortunate. I don't think everyone has that story, but I never grew up with bullying or getting made fun of because I was Asian from other races. So in general, it was just being different. I think, and differences I think are really interesting to me, especially being someone that graduated international studies. So I think it's what the differences and similarities are so cool to kind of compare between different cultures and people.
That's good. Yeah, that's good that it wasn't like a hardship they had to go through. I definitely went through like, it's completely different culture. I'm just gonna have to do that.
It was like a big culture shock for you because you abruptly found yourself here in the U.S.
Yeah. But maybe I can talk more about that later. But it was really interesting to hear growing up as Filipino American here.
Yeah. Can I poop? I need to go to the bathroom. Break time.
Break time.
And we're back.
We were back from our break.
From the toilet.
Yeah, from the toilet. Well, shall we continue to our last question?
Yes, the final question.
The final question this time. Okay, this is going to be a tricky one. Between Japanese, Korean, and Filipino food, which cuisine do we think is the most underrated and why?
Underrated.
Ooh, tricky. I think Japanese food has a lot of recognition now, so I don't think Japanese food is underrated. I think it's considered like even like a high-end thing where like omakase, like $150 per
so normal
person.
I feel like to have Japanese food as a lot of people's diets, even people who aren't Japanese and other Asians too. I feel like still not everyone, but very widespread now.
Maybe it's not quite overrated, but it's definitely not underrated. What about Korean food? I think some parts of Korean food is still a little bit underrated. I think people do know Korean food, like kimchi and stuff, but maybe they haven't discovered a lot of interesting Korean food. Like my favorite is the jjajangmyeon, the black bean noodle. I don't think a lot of American people know about that, right? So maybe it's a little bit undiscovered, maybe up and coming. I don't think it's seen as like a high-end food, like a Japanese food, but not quite like a normalized everyday food that you would just go. Like in Seattle, I think like people know Korean food, but in Austin, I don't think people do as much.
For jjajangmyeon?
Or like a Korean food. I feel like a lot of Austin people talk about like a ramen.
A lot. There's a lot of Koreans here though.
Well, not the Korean people. Of course, they know Korean food, but like American people.
I see.
Caucasians.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
I guess when I said American people, I mean like Caucasians and like Black African people, but
Mexicans,
other
ethnicities,
I don't know. There are definitely some pop, like a Korean. There's like an interesting Korean and Mexican bowl put together.
Yeah, like fusions, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, but I think they recognize it more as like a kimchi.
Yeah,
they don't recognize other interesting parts of Korean food, so I'd say it's a little bit underrated. But Filipino food,
I think Filipino food is the most underrated. But I just feel like because it's not, it hasn't really developed very much yet.
It doesn't even exist as like restaurants, like other than Jollibee, which I don't consider a restaurant, in my opinion.
Well, I think it's interesting because in the Philippines, the best Filipino food I've had has been at family members' homes, not restaurants.
Right, not at a restaurant.
Yeah.
Like all the cool, what's the lechon party? Those are at home.
Oh, like a
Kamayan, lechon, like a pork, all the thing. I never had it at a restaurant because whenever I eat those, it's at someone's home. Like it's hosted.
As a party.
It's a family thing,
Yeah.
And obviously I had your grandma's Filipino food in Seattle.
Yeah.
I'd say that's still the best that I've had because everything else is just Jollibee and whatever else. That's just not a real, to me, it's not a real Filipino food, even though Filipino people might think that's part of their culture.
Interesting because I feel like that was Filipinos taking something Western and then making that into their like fast food cuisine. So that's I feel like I do love lumpia and pancit, which I think are the other Filipino dishes that are well known outside of Jollibee.
Lumpia especially.
Yeah. But and as much as I love those, there are a lot of other dishes that I find to be really delicious that virtually no one knows about if they're not Filipino or unless you've gone to a Filipino person's house, like a friend or coworker or someone. Or you work in a hospital, something like that. They bring it in at a potluck. But I think it is increasing in popularity now. I know there are a few Filipino restaurants in Austin that I heard are good, and Filipinos have talked about them. So it would be good to try. But so far I see ube everywhere, so I feel like that is an adaptation of Filipino cuisine that's taking
like a
more
kimchi,
place. Yeah,
but it's like a Filipino version of kimchi. It's just like, there's one easy thing that we can call it, Filipino adaptation.
Or something that has like an Asian or a foreign flavor to it, I guess. Yeah. But I mean, definitely not bad either, because I think what's really cool here in Austin is a lot of restaurants, a lot of shops are owned by Asian Americans, and they genuinely want to bring their culture, but also the culture of other Asian Americans into whatever they're running. And I think it's just because here the Asian American population is still growing, so they want to support each other. So I think that's a really great aspect of that.
I think statistically we looked at this before we were moving to Austin. There are like a half as much Asians in Austin in the last census, or maybe not a census. I think it's more like an annual data survey. So Seattle obviously is so many more Asians.
Compared to Seattle.
Yeah, compared to Seattle, which we grew up. And if you go to a place like a Bellevue, like you see Asians everywhere. Yeah. But here, we go to a place and we have to go to like an Asian place, like where
I can
Asians
count
gather.
how many Asians there are usually when I go out, and I'm surprised if I get more than 3, unless I go to a place where obviously we would meet Asians, like an Asian grocery store or restaurant. Yeah.
And there are definitely regional parts of Austin where if we go to like a north of Austin, that's where we get like a lot of Korean food or Asian food. But Filipino food, it's like it's so hard to find a good restaurant because it's not a common thing, and people only know about Jollibee or maybe lumpia from frozen sections in like Asian food aisle. But but otherwise, would we agree that it's the Filipino food that's possibly most underrated?
I would say it's the most underrated. There's a lot of Filipino dishes that have just never been heard of before, just not popular yet. And I feel like they will become popular as Filipino food rises in popularity, like Korean and maybe Japanese food.
Yeah. I personally love to see more Filipino food restaurant because I miss your grandma's food and there's nowhere to be found and she can't cook anymore.
Yeah,
so
she's getting old.
Yeah, so what am I gonna do? Where am I gonna get the Filipino food fixed?
Yeah.
And it's not the same when your like aunt or your mom makes like they make good Filipino food. But it's a little bit different. I think they were the generation that maybe had to work hard and, you know, working as a housewife was more like a secondary thing. And I know your grandma was more like have to take care of like 8 kids or 7 kids in her family, and she was really good at cooking.
Had a lot of kids back then.
Yeah. So I miss it, and I don't even remember what I was even eating, but
she
had made all the food and it was all delicious.
Yeah.
But yeah, that concludes the first episode of the UbeMatcha, and hopefully it was like fun to listen to or watch us talk about it. And I would love to maybe hear about people's reaction or their opinions of all the 5 questions we went through. And please make sure to subscribe to the YouTube and the shorts and the TikTok that we'll probably have and probably listed in the description. But yeah, until next time. What's our ending word? Like ubematcha or I don't know.
I don't know. Ubematcha time.
Ubematcha time. Until next time. See you.